It was a quiet evening, and Claire was half listening to our daughter's enthusiastic story about a field trip while simultaneously typing on her phone, a faint smile on her face. I noticed her face lighting up with each ping, each vibration of her phone, though she kept it angled away from me. I didn't want to be one of those husbands, the kind who goes snooping, who doubts his wife at every turn. But something felt off, that gut-wrenching twinge that sits heavy, undeniable, in your stomach. I forced myself to look away, giving her the benefit of the doubt. After all, we'd been together for 15 years, built a life, a family, a home that was supposed to be unshakable. I'd always prided myself on trust, so I swallowed my doubts. But that feeling lingered. Every late meeting, every business trip added fuel to a fire I didn't want to acknowledge. And then, the trigger. It was a Tuesday night. I'd come home from a long day at work, and she was already gone, an emergency meeting across town, she'd said in a rushed text. Dinner was still warm, the kids fed and bathed, but the house felt eerily quiet without her presence. I finished up, put the kids to bed, and wandered around the house, restless. A strange thought struck me as I tidied up the kitchen, maybe I should check her closet. It wasn't my usual style, but curiosity gnawed at me. Claire had been gone for more nights than I could count, and every time I questioned it, she brushed me off with quick reassurances. I opened the closet door, and right there in front, her small suitcase, zipped up and ready. Something about it felt wrong. Usually, she packed right before a trip, and yet here it was, almost like it had been packed in a hurry. My hands hovered over the zipper, hesitation slowing me down. It was ridiculous, I was debating with myself about invading my own wife's privacy. But, unable to stop myself, I pulled the zipper open. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, alongside a few toiletries. But as I rummaged, my hand brushed something cold and metallic. My heart pounded. I dug in deeper and pulled out a small bottle of men's cologne. Not mine, certainly. I hadn't worn cologne in years. And beneath it, a set of postcards from cities she'd never mentioned visiting, New Orleans, Seattle, Chicago. Places she had supposedly traveled to for work, but she'd never shared details about them. The weight of those postcards made me sink onto the floor. Had she really been to these places with someone else? I felt the slow burn of anger creeping up, but it was laced with something worse, a sickening cocktail of doubt and betrayal. I had never doubted her, not once. The idea that she had taken these trips, that she had spent time, moments, with another man, was like a slap to the face. I could have confronted her that night. Part of me wanted to. But I'd read enough stories, heard enough tales, to know that a confrontation without proof would just lead to more denial, more deflection. So, I kept quiet, my thoughts stewing in silence. I'd spent the night on the couch, unable to face our bed, that place where I had once felt so secure. I thought of the life we'd built, of our children sleeping upstairs, and wondered how many lies it had all been built on. The next few days were a blur of feigned normalcy. Claire seemed cheerful, oblivious to the fact that my world had tilted on its axis. I started noticing details I had once ignored, the way she'd check her phone constantly, even during dinner, the way she'd lock herself in the bathroom longer than necessary. Once, I heard her murmuring on the phone late at night, her voice low, muffled, as if trying to keep her words from slipping out into the open air. I couldn't shake the idea that I needed more, that I couldn't just let my suspicion simmer without any action. One day, while Claire was at work, I decided to dig deeper. I sat at her computer and opened her email. My hands trembled as I typed in her password, a shared one, the same password we used for so many things. I justified my actions by telling myself it was my right to know. After all, we'd built a life together. I had every reason to seek the truth, to uncover whatever she was hiding. I found a chain of emails that dated back several months, emails from someone named Jeremy. The first few were innocent enough, work-related, a few jokes here and there. But then the tone shifted. Subtle, at first, but unmistakable. Messages that said things like, "Can't wait to see you again," and "Our last trip was unforgettable." My heart pounded, the words blurring on the screen. I clicked on message after message, each one painting a clearer picture of their affair, of the betrayal I had tried to ignore. One email read, "New Orleans was amazing. Can't wait for next time." I felt sick, picturing her there, with him, in that city she had never mentioned. I remembered how she had come back from that conference, so cheerful and light-hearted, telling me about a boring series of lectures, and how she'd missed home. It was as if I were seeing her for the first time, seeing her mask for what it was. The Claire I knew was a facade, a character she played while hiding a stranger beneath. I sat there, numb, for what felt like hours. A small, hopeful part of me wished I was wrong, that somehow, this wasn't as damning as it seemed. But the evidence was undeniable, and the world I thought I knew was now a lie. I glanced around our house, at the photos of her smiling, laughing, and I wondered if any of it had been real for her. Or was she just waiting for the next chance to slip away, to escape to a life I wasn't a part of? It was a moment of reckoning, one I had never prepared for, one I never thought I'd face. I stood up, trembling, feeling the weight of everything I'd just uncovered pressing down on me. I walked to the living room, where we had once shared so many happy moments, and stared at the empty spaces. It felt as though I were looking at a stranger's life. The warmth, the joy, everything I had felt here was now tainted. I knew then that I couldn't go back, couldn't pretend that this hadn't happened. But I also knew that a direct confrontation wasn't the answer, not yet. Claire was a master of words, someone who could spin stories and shift blame, and I wasn't going to give her that chance. No, I'd let her think she was still in control, let her think she'd pulled the wool over my eyes. I would play my part, just as she had played hers. But in my mind, I was already planning my next steps, my revenge, a way to turn this betrayal into a reckoning she'd never forget. I felt a strange calmness settle over me, a sharp clarity of purpose. I didn't know how or when, but I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she had dealt me. I spent the next few weeks living as though nothing had changed. But inside, I was a different man, one who could no longer see his wife's face without picturing the betrayal, one who pretended normalcy while quietly calculating his next steps. Every glance she cast in my direction, every word she said, every touch felt rehearsed, as though she were reading lines in a play I hadn't been cast in. If she noticed the distance between us, she didn't mention it. In fact, she seemed more preoccupied than ever. At first, I thought I could just let things be. Leave, start fresh, cut the ties. But that felt too simple. The betrayal was too deep, too fresh. I couldn't walk away and let her escape the consequences of her actions. No, I needed her to feel the sting, the same sense of utter helplessness that had gripped me when I discovered her deception. But to pull this off, I had to play the role of the trusting husband a little while longer. The first part of my plan was to gather more proof. I knew about Jeremy now, knew about the other cities she had visited. But something told me there was more. I wanted to have it all laid bare, every lie she had told, every secret she thought was safely tucked away. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I retrieved Claire's laptop and her phone. She had set up passwords on both, but I'd been paying attention, years of marriage hadn't gone entirely to waste. I knew the digits she used. Her phone was loaded with more secrets than I had anticipated. Texts, photos, videos. She was meticulous enough to delete recent messages with Jeremy, but I found a string of older ones, tucked away in a hidden folder, ones she must have forgotten to erase. Each message painted a picture of their escapades, her excitement, her longing. And the photos of them at a beach, at a restaurant, in places she'd once claimed to be alone on work trips. There was one particular video that made my blood boil. They were in a dimly lit hotel room, the unmistakable intimacy between them filling every frame. She looked happy, alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. That was the moment I knew, this wasn't a fling, not some harmless dalliance. This was a betrayal at the deepest level. She was someone else entirely with him, a woman I didn't know, one who looked at him with the love she had once reserved for me. I wanted to break something, to scream, to drag her out of bed and demand an explanation, but I held myself back. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. I still had more groundwork to lay. Every night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I found myself drawn back to that phone, combing through her history, searching for more evidence to fuel my anger, to deepen my resolve. I was becoming obsessed with the details, each new discovery feeding the storm of fury that churned within me. One night, while scrolling through her contacts, I noticed a second phone number under her name. It was odd, considering she'd never mentioned having another line. I copied the number and ran it through a reverse search tool, hoping to confirm what I already suspected. Sure enough, the number led me to an anonymous messaging app. This was her other world, the one she kept hidden from me, and it was here that she exchanged messages with Jeremy, planning their secret trips, their rendezvous. I wanted to shut it all down, to call him out, to confront her, but patience kept me in check. I knew if I blew up now, I'd lose my chance for real revenge. Instead, I jotted down every detail, saved every message, every image. I would hold on to these like weapons, waiting for the right time to strike. The more I watched her, the more I noticed how comfortable she'd become with her deception. She'd go about her day, humming to herself as she packed for her next business trip, smiling as she told me about the late nights ahead. I would nod, forcing a smile, playing my role to perfection. But in my mind, I was building the trap, setting up the pieces that would bring her whole facade crashing down. One evening, she casually mentioned her next trip. "It's just a short one," she said, brushing her hair back as she scanned her packing list. "I'll be back by Friday." I looked up from my book, feigning disinterest. "Where to this time?" "New York," she replied without missing a beat. "Some meetings with a new client." "Nothing exciting." "Sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Need a ride to the airport?" She gave me a quick, almost dismissive smile. "No need, I'll just take a cab." "It's early in the morning." I nodded, playing the dutiful husband who didn't suspect a thing. But that night, I made my move. I'd arranged to track her through a GPS device tucked into the lining of her suitcase. It was small, discreet, nothing she'd ever notice. I wanted to know exactly where she went, who she met, and how far she'd go to keep her secrets safe. The day she left, I kissed her goodbye, told her to have a good trip, and watched as she walked out the door, her suitcase trailing behind her. The moment she was out of sight, I turned to my computer, bringing up the GPS tracker's location. Within an hour, she was on her way, the dot on my screen inching closer to the airport. I waited, watching as it pinged off different locations, following her trail. To my surprise, her first stop wasn't New York. She had rerouted her flight to New Orleans, the same city she'd visited with Jeremy months before. I clenched my fists, the bitter confirmation burning through me. So she was going back to their old haunt, slipping away under the guise of business. My heart hammered in my chest, a mix of fury and anticipation building as I tracked her every move. When the dot finally settled at a downtown hotel, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was time. I took screenshots, recorded the data, saved it all. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. I wanted her to believe she was safe, that she had successfully fooled me once again. Let her bask in her false sense of security. The longer she believed in her lies, the sweeter the moment of revelation would be. The following night, as I watched her dot move around the city, I sent her a simple text. "Hope the meetings are going well. Miss you." I imagined her reading it, glancing at Jeremy with a smirk, believing she had outwitted me once again. But I was done playing the fool. She had no idea what was coming. While she was away, I started making my own preparations. I went through our finances, noting every asset, every shared account. I met with a lawyer, discussing the necessary steps for a swift, clean break when the time came. I had always imagined us growing old together, sharing a future filled with plans and dreams. But those visions had been shattered, replaced with a cold determination to sever the ties that bound us. I spent that weekend clearing out my belongings from the house. She would come home to an empty shell, the life we had built together dismantled in her absence. I knew she'd be shocked, desperate to understand what had happened, but by then, it would be too late. I would be gone, out of her reach, leaving nothing but a note to explain my departure. As I packed, memories surfaced: our wedding day, the births of our children, the countless little moments that had once filled me with so much happiness. But those memories felt distant now, like remnants of a life I no longer recognized. Every item I put away felt like a release, a letting go of the man I had been, the husband who had trusted too much, loved too deeply. When Sunday arrived, I stood in the empty house, surveying the remnants of what had once been our life. I felt no sadness, only a grim satisfaction. I had left enough for the kids, enough to keep things functional, but anything personal, anything tied to us, was gone. It was as though I had erased myself from her world, leaving only a hollow space where I had once been. As the final piece, I left a note on the dresser, a simple message scrawled in my handwriting: "It's over. I'll see you in court." It was cold, impersonal, just as I wanted it to be. She had destroyed the warmth between us, and I had no intention of giving her the satisfaction of my anger or my pain. With one last look around the empty room, I turned and walked out, locking the door behind me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. There was no going back, no second chances. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. As I drove away, a strange calm settled over me. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer play the role of the naive husband, where I could finally reclaim my life from the ashes of her betrayal. And as I watched the house grow smaller in the rearview mirror, I knew that I would never look back. I drove straight to a friend's place after leaving the house. John had known me since college, long enough to sense something was off the moment I walked through his door with an overnight bag and a tense look on my face. He didn't ask questions, he just nodded toward the guest room. I was grateful for that. Words felt too heavy, too real. I needed time to let the reality sink in, to adjust to the idea that my life with Claire was over. The next morning, I checked the tracker I had left in Claire's suitcase. She was still in New Orleans, checked into the same hotel she'd used with Jeremy during her previous trips. The knowledge was both a comfort and a knife twist. I wanted her to feel the shock and confusion of walking into the empty house, the disorientation of her world unraveling. By the second day, Claire was on her way back. I could picture her rolling her suitcase up to the house, expecting things to be exactly as she'd left them. The memory of her smile as she departed haunted me, that faint, secretive look she wore as she kissed me goodbye. But the thought of her finding an empty house, a note, and a life shattered? It brought a grim satisfaction. John noticed my tension and finally broke the silence over coffee. "You going to tell me what happened, or should I just guess?" I stared into my cup, the bitter smell mingling with the weight of everything I had uncovered. "She's been seeing someone else," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to myself. "For months. Maybe longer. She's been using business trips as a cover." He stayed silent for a long time, his face a mask of sympathy and disgust. "Man, I'm sorry. That's rough. You're staying here as long as you need. Don't worry about a thing." After John left for work, I wandered around his place, trying to fill the empty spaces in my head with something other than rage and betrayal. But it was impossible. My mind kept drifting back to what she would be feeling, whether she would try to call me, explain herself. Part of me wanted her to feel pain, while another part still felt that old, familiar love, lingering like a ghost. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, my phone rang. Claire's name flashed on the screen. I ignored it. She called again. And again. I let her calls pile up, her messages flooding in. "Adam, where are you? I came home, and everything's gone." "Why are your things gone?" "Adam, please, this isn't funny. Call me back. Please." Finally, after an hour of silence, she sent a longer message. "Adam, I know you're hurt. But I can explain. Please. Just talk to me. Let's talk about this like adults." I read it, my anger flaring up all over again. Like adults? After what she had done, the lies, the manipulation, the sheer betrayal. She wanted to talk about this now? I shut off my phone and tossed it onto the couch, resisting the urge to smash it into pieces. There was no talking left to do. She'd made her choices, and now she was facing the fallout. But in the quiet, my thoughts circled back to the years we had shared, to moments that now felt tainted, discolored. Had she ever loved me, or had it all been a lie? Was Jeremy just the most recent in a long line of betrayals, or had she truly just started seeing him? These questions hung heavy, gnawing at me, twisting in ways I couldn't ignore. I left John's house, taking a drive to clear my head. The day was bright, too bright, and the normalcy of life around me was jarring. Families strolled along sidewalks, kids played in parks, and couples laughed together on restaurant patios. I was alone now, in a world where Claire had forced me into this strange, surreal solitude. I stopped at a small park, sitting on a bench and watching the world pass by. I thought of our children, of what I would have to tell them, how I would explain this mess Claire had created. My phone buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I glanced at it. I know I've hurt you, but please let me explain. It's not what you think. I scoffed, shaking my head. Not what I think. I thought to myself. The evidence was there, plain as day. I took a deep breath and typed a response before I could change my mind. There's nothing to explain. I saw it all. It's over, Claire. The reply came almost instantly. Please, Adam. Just meet me once. Let's talk. We owe it to each other to at least talk. I clenched my teeth, feeling the fury spike all over again. But there was also a small, insidious curiosity that tugged at me. Maybe hearing her excuses, seeing her attempts to justify it, would give me the final push I needed to let go of any lingering doubts. And a part of me wanted to watch her squirm, to see the realization of what she'd thrown away finally settle in. Fine, I typed. Tomorrow. Noon. I'll meet you at the cafe downtown. That night, sleep was an elusive stranger. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the countless lies she had fed me, the years I had blindly trusted her, every betrayal sharper and clearer than the last. The pain was like a bruise, tender and raw, spreading until it consumed every inch of me. By dawn, my resolve had hardened into something sharp, cold. The cafe was quiet the next day, its usual hustle replaced by a low murmur as a few patrons lingered over their coffees. I chose a booth in the corner, one where I could see her approach. I didn't have to wait long. Claire walked in, scanning the room, her face pale and drawn. The moment she saw me, relief flickered in her eyes, and she hurried over, sliding into the seat across from me. Adam, she began, her voice shaky, I'm so sorry. I know you must be furious, and I know you're hurt. But please, just let me explain. I watched her for a moment, taking in the familiar lines of her face, the way her hands fidgeted, her gaze darting around, unable to meet mine. Go ahead, I said, my voice colder than I'd intended. Explain. She took a deep breath, her fingers twisting the napkin in front of her. It started months ago. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Jeremy, he was just someone I met through work, and we clicked. He made me feel alive again. I clenched my jaw, every word digging deeper into the wound. Alive? So you had to destroy our marriage for a thrill? You couldn't just tell me you were unhappy? Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. It wasn't like that, Adam. I felt lost. Our life, it became so routine. I felt invisible. And he was there, and I was weak. I scoffed. Weak? That's what you call lying to me for months? Hiding behind business trips? Using our money to fund your little affair? Her face flushed with shame. I know it was wrong. I know I messed up. But, Adam, it didn't mean anything. You and the kids, you're my life. I just got lost. I shook my head, disgusted. Didn't mean anything? You expect me to believe that? After everything? After all the sneaking around, the lies? She looked away, wiping a tear. I don't know what to say. I don't have an excuse. Can we fix this? I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling. I'll cut off all contact with him. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You think it's that easy? That we can just fix this? I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You shattered everything. The trust, the love. It's all gone, Claire. Her face crumpled, and she reached across the table, her hand trembling. Adam, please. Don't throw this away. Don't throw us away. I stared at her hand, that hand I had held so many times, the hand that had once been my safe place. Now it was nothing but a reminder of her betrayal. I slowly shook my head. You already threw us away. You made that choice when you decided he was worth risking everything for. I'm done, Claire. She gasped, her face going pale. Please, Adam. Don't do this. I made a mistake. Don't let this end us. But I was resolute. No, Claire. You ended us. I'm just following through. As I stood to leave, her tear-streaked face blurring in my mind, I felt a strange peace wash over me. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. She was now a stranger to me, a shadow of the woman I had once loved. And as I walked away, leaving her behind, I knew I was finally free of her lies. Months passed, but the memory of that last conversation with Claire lingered, a weight that never quite lifted. Despite the relief I'd felt when I walked away, a hollow ache remained, an emptiness that refused to fade. I poured myself into work, into my kids, into anything that kept me moving forward. But at night, when the house was quiet and dark, memories crept in, sharp and uninvited. Our lives had been woven together for so long that tearing them apart left scars I hadn't anticipated. Claire had tried reaching out several times. She'd left messages apologizing, begging for another chance, but I hadn't replied. Each time I heard her voice or saw her name pop up on my phone, it felt like ripping open an old wound. So I kept my distance, focusing on what was left of my life, trying to rebuild from the ashes of what she'd left behind. One evening, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something urged me to answer. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but gentle. Is this Adam? The woman asked. Yes, this is he, I replied, a slight unease settling in. This is Jennifer. I'm calling from St. John's Hospital. I'm afraid I have some difficult news about your wife, about Claire. The words hit like a punch to the gut. My throat went dry, and I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. What happened? I stammered, barely able to get the words out. She was admitted earlier tonight. There was an accident, Jennifer said, her tone soft, careful. She's stable, but the injuries are severe. I think it would be best if you came down. I barely remember driving to the hospital. My thoughts were a blur, images of Claire flashing through my mind, our children, our years together, that last cold conversation at the cafe. I hadn't spoken to her since then, hadn't seen her face, hadn't heard her voice outside of voicemails. And now, the finality of it hit me. I didn't know what state she'd be in, or if she'd even want to see me, but I knew I had to be there. The hospital was a maze of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. I was led down a sterile corridor, my heartbeat loud in my ears, drowning out the nurse's words. Finally, she stopped at a door and gestured for me to enter. Inside, Claire lay on the hospital bed, her face pale, her eyes closed. She looked so small, so fragile, a far cry from the woman I had once known. Tubes snaked around her, monitors beeped softly. I hesitated, feeling an odd reluctance to step forward, as if the distance I'd maintained so carefully these past months were a fragile thread I was about to break. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she seemed disoriented. But then her gaze settled on me, and a faint, painful smile touched her lips. Adam, her voice was barely a whisper, a ghost of the warmth I remembered. I swallowed, trying to force down the emotions that surged up, bitter and raw. What happened, Claire? She looked away, her eyes misty. It was raining. I was driving home, thinking about you. About everything I ruined. I didn't see the truck coming until it was too late. I stayed silent, watching her struggle with her words, seeing the remorse that had once seemed so insincere now etched deeply into her face. She looked older, her once vibrant features worn with guilt and grief. I'm sorry, Adam, she whispered. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything. But I still love you. I never stopped loving you. The words hung in the air, heavy and broken, and for a moment, I felt the weight of my own bitterness, the years I had spent carrying anger like a shield. I believed it protected me, but in that moment, looking at her broken body, I saw the cost. Claire had destroyed our marriage, yes, but the wreckage had hurt us both, had left us both lost and alone. I don't know if I can forgive you, Claire, I said, my voice trembling. You broke something that can't be fixed. And I hate that. I hate that we ended up here. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I understand. I hate it, too. We sat in silence, the distance between us no longer defined by anger or resentment but by the shared, unspoken understanding that our love had come to an end long before we realized it. The monitors beeped softly in the background, a steady reminder of time slipping away, of the inevitability of loss. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. I just want you to know. I never meant to hurt you. I lost myself, and I let you pay the price. I don't expect anything from you, Adam, but I needed you to know that. I closed my eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to break through. I wanted to yell, to tell her that I didn't care, that her words didn't matter. But the truth was, they did. Somewhere, beneath all the anger and hurt, her words touched a part of me that still remembered the good years, that still remembered the woman I had loved before everything fell apart. I loved you, Claire, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. I loved you more than anything. But you took that love and you broke it. A tear slid down her cheek, and she nodded. I know. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I stayed with her until the early hours of the morning, each of us trapped in our own memories, our own regrets. As dawn approached, the doctor entered, his expression somber. He pulled me aside and explained her injuries in a low, grave tone. The impact had caused internal bleeding, damage to her lungs, and multiple fractures. They were doing everything they could, but the odds weren't in her favor. I listened, numb, as he laid out the facts, each word slicing into me like a blade. Over the next few days, I visited her every evening, sitting by her bedside, watching as the life slowly drained from her. Our children came, too, but I couldn't tell them the whole truth. I let them see the mother who loved them, who spoke to them with a tenderness I had almost forgotten. And in those moments, I saw glimpses of the woman I had once known, the one I had built a life with. On the fourth night, as I sat beside her, she looked at me with a fragile, pleading expression. Adam, please don't remember me like this. Don't let this be the last memory. I took her hand, the warmth of it already fading, and for the first time, I let myself feel the sadness, the weight of what we had lost. I knew then that no amount of anger could change what had happened, that the bitterness I had clung to would never bring me peace. I'll try, Claire, I whispered, my voice cracking. I'll try. A faint smile touched her lips, and she closed her eyes, her hand going slack in mine. I sat there long after she had fallen asleep, feeling the quiet weight of finality settle over me. She passed away that night, and as I left the hospital, I felt an ache so deep, it seemed to cut to the bone. In the weeks that followed, I buried her and went through the motions of grief. Friends and family offered condolences, their words hollow, their sympathy misplaced. They didn't know the truth, didn't know the complicated mess of love and betrayal that had defined our final days. I couldn't bring myself to share it with anyone. It was a burden that belonged to me alone. As time passed, I began to rebuild, to find a new way forward. The memories of Claire faded, softened, until they became just fragments of a life that felt like a distant dream. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of her smile in our children's faces, hear her laughter in their voices, and I'd remember the love we had once shared, the life we had once built. In the end, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about absolving her, about erasing what she had done. It was about letting go, about freeing myself from the chains of anger and pain that had bound me for so long. Claire was gone, but in her absence, I found a way to reclaim my life, to carry forward the lessons and scars she had left behind. And though the pain never truly left, it became a quiet ache, a reminder of a love lost, of a life that had once been whole. In time, I learned to live with it, to accept it as part of who I was. And in that acceptance, I found a kind of peace.